So good morning, everyone. We're here to have a lively discussion on Kubernetes and OpenStack. And with me, I have Craig and Brandon. Perhaps we start with quick introductions.
Sure. Hey, I'm Craig. I'm a product guy at Google. I've been working on computing technologies at Google for around 6 years now. Started in the infrastructure service space, started a little project Kubernetes, and was a participant in the creation of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which is an open foundation to bring cloud native computing technologies to enterprises everywhere.
And I'm Brandon Phillips. I'm the CTO and co-founder of CoreOS. Actually remember that the last time I was on this stage was 3 years ago when we were at Y Combinator demo days talking about Google's infrastructure for all and wanting to bring Google-like infrastructure to enterprises. And so it's kind of great to be back on the stage talking about it here with a lot of cool technology being built.
So gentlemen, let's open by cutting to the chase here. If we have Kubernetes, then why do we need OpenStack?
Okay, it's a great question. I'd love to answer this by looking back sort of 6 or so years on my sort of own history, where at Google we had the same hypothesis. If we have Borg and we have modern cloud native computing as embodied by something like App Engine, why would we ever need a traditional VM-based infrastructure service offering? Right? We were in basically the same position, but coming in from the other side. And the answer is the world just doesn't fit into a straight-up cloud native computing world today. Like maybe in 10 years' time, we'll be there. Maybe we'll get to a point where a lot of the more traditional applications work really well in these ecosystems. But the reality is the world is hybrid. The world is hybrid in terms of the application patterns that people need to use. It's hybrid in terms of the types of infrastructure primitives people need to have access to. And it's hybrid in terms of where people actually want to run their workloads. And so I think it's a very easy answer, which is enterprise needs a set of familiar basic infrastructure primitives, and these are really well embodied in OpenStack today. Enterprise is interested in making the transition to cloud native and more progressive computing, and that's where Kubernetes is going over time. There's a lot of alignment between these two technologies, and I think that they actually bring a lot to each other. I'm sure we'll get into that in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the consumption models are slightly different of those two things, and it's just a spectrum of when and why these different enterprises are going to adopt this stuff. So there's a large incumbent of virtual machine users, and those users aren't going to go away, and there's a large amount of capital expenditure that's been put in place to buy those servers, to build out that infrastructure. And as developers and other organizations inside the enterprise start to demand this cloud native stuff, it makes total sense to kind of blend the two.
So how did this relationship between OpenStack and Kubernetes start? How did it come together?
If you look back, I think it kind of grew organically from a lot of customers on. The first awareness I had of the sort of opportunities here was when we started talking to some of our customers who were heavily invested in OpenStack. A great example would be someone like eBay. And they were really looking at the world of containers and cloud native and trying to think about how to bring these technologies to the traditional infrastructure as a service environment. And folks started asking questions around, should it be Kubernetes and OpenStack? Should it be OpenStack and Kubernetes? But one thing that was clear was that there were a lot of problems that existed in both ecosystems that were unaddressed. When you looked at the world of OpenStack as it stood or as it stands today, there are some really gnarly problems. It's hard to actually deal with the operationalization of a very rich portfolio of services that exist in the ecosystem. If you actually want to roll out an OpenStack deployment and you want to version it and update it and sort of manage it, it's tough. And turns out cloud native technologies make that a lot easier. They give you a very simple, logical compute substrate into which you can deploy your services. And so I think the first epiphany was, wow, OpenStack can be thought of as a really complex system that's just a set of services. And so it was natural to wonder how we could bring more natural and cloud native management to that ecosystem. The second thing that sort of we started observing as we talked to customers was the significant gap that existed between the efficiencies that a customer could get out of more traditional monolithic VM-based scheduling versus these much more agile and dynamic systems. When certainly looking back to what happens inside Google and how Google runs, there's almost an order of magnitude sort of difference in terms of the efficiencies that we can get out of our own smart infrastructure versus what our customers were able to get out of the VMs in the early days. So there's this big gap that exists between those two worlds. And so, folks are asking, could a technology like Kubernetes bring much richer efficiencies to the OpenStack ecosystem? That was the second thing. And then on the flip side of the house, people and a lot of the folks that were sort of operating in the space started looking at the Kubernetes ecosystem and asking questions like, how would I get extensions that offer more traditional services? How would I get block storage wired in? How would I get object storage wired in? How do we actually get this integrated into our identity and access management systems? And OpenStack has a very robust set of services that naturally complement these technologies, and has done a lot of work in dealing with the integration into the physical infrastructure, and has an amazing vendor ecosystem around it. So as we started talking in the communities, it just became obvious, right? Like, these technologies were really made to be together. Kubernetes solves a whole bunch of problems and offers a window into a new way of thinking about deploying and managing and scheduling your applications. And OpenStack provides a very robust set of basic infrastructure primitives that you can get together. So I think it kind of was this, just to answer the question, was this kind of dawning realization of the real value of this alignment.
Yeah. And going back to 2014, we started playing with containerizing OpenStack. So my co-founder and I, we come from Rackspace, we're ex-Rackers, and one of the things the very first thing we started to learn from talking to customers and stuff was that they had this ongoing thing of wanting to essentially more consistently manage the way they deploy OpenStack. And so this was kind of the first thing that we tackled even before Kubernetes existed. Was we saw the opportunity here of managing the application, the complex application that is OpenStack inside of containers, and thinking of containers as a way of, in a more cost-effective, more operator-friendly way of doing the blue-green deploys, doing the rolling upgrades, doing the scaling out of the application that's OpenStack. And this was all done on our pre-Kubernetes scheduling technology called Fleet, but since then, kind of bringing the two technologies together with kind of a compassion towards the OpenStack operator has really been one of the initial motivating factors of this.
Yeah. So, both OpenStack and Kubernetes, they're both community-driven projects. So what are the opportunities for the two communities to perhaps collaborate more together? Or is it better for each of these projects to evolve independently? What are your views on that?
So I think that Craig kind of alluded to this. There are a few really great opportunities where OpenStack's providing a lot of the infrastructure that is still necessary even when you have containers. So things like the object store authentication through things like Keystone. These are things that we've started to bring inside of the Kubernetes project. So you can authenticate your Kubernetes APIs against Keystone off databases. You can mount block storage off of the OpenStack APIs. You can utilize inside of applications the object. So there's the object stores. So there's a bunch of opportunities here to mix and match the components. And you see a lot of enterprises today that have large chunks of OpenStack applications deployed and are wanting to utilize that data that they already have stored, or utilize those software-defined networks that they've already got built out. But they want to also be able to bring those containerized applications into those environments.
Yeah, I think Brandon hit the nail on the head there. There's just a lot of important base integration work to do. And by doing that base integration work, we'll get ourselves into a situation where there are very strong alignments and strong synergies between the technologies. And we've already talked about that a bit. I think there's a lot of other work that we need to do as a community, and I'd like to see us start chewing off together. And some of the work there is around the next layer of abstraction, independently of how your workload is scheduled, or whether it's running in a dynamic, cloud-native scheduling system, or whether it's running in more traditional infrastructure as a service like environment. There's a set of high-level things that we need to start thinking about as a community, and I think it's a great opportunity for us to start collaborating. One of those things is, as we look to the way that these sort of next generation enterprise applications are described, composed, and distributed, I think there's an amazing opportunity for us to come together across the two communities and potentially other communities as well. The Cloud Foundry communities, the Mesos communities, all of the folks that are doing the cloud native, and then also environments like OpenStack, and rally together to help the software vendors that are building distributed systems and deploying them into these environments to have a set of common standards for how to actually describe, package, and distribute an application. And I think it's very important that we get that right. And I think there's also a great opportunity for us to start thinking about how to broker services across the ecosystems. How to reason about the lifecycle management. And so I think even if we look to the sort of evolution of our technologies, there's some really nice opportunities to embark on high-level projects that create natural abstractions that cover these areas very well. So that's the one thing I'd love to see us start to kind of work on more collaboratively as communities. And then the second thing is kind of looking to my own sort of experiences inside Google and the way that we run our infrastructure as a service space. There's potentially even deeper integration. There's even deeper places we can go in terms of the alignment of OpenStack and things like Kubernetes. So I don't know if people realize this, but every virtual machine that is scheduled in our infrastructure as a service environment is actually running in a container scheduled by Borg under the covers. And that gives us a nice way to interleave in a very efficient way traditional workloads using the same physical containment model as our cloud native workloads. And I'd love to see us go beyond in the OpenStack community, going beyond just looking at OpenStack as a series of composite services that we can help host and manage, to getting much deeper into the actual operating environment and finding ways to bring container technologies and VM technologies together as a community to create much more robust isolation frameworks, but at the same time preserving a lot of the value of the containers. So there's a really exciting opportunity as a community to think about where container technologies are going, how we can preserve the best attributes of what the traditional infrastructure service and VM-based model brings, and then bring it together to both of our communities at the same time.
So how should we enable that? Should we have joint roadmap discussions between the communities? How do we better work together and bring these ideas to play?
So I think it comes down to this. OpenStack is an amazing sort of open community that's garnered a tremendous amount of support and commitment from a broad vendor community and a lot of adoption from others, from the actual end users. We have a relatively nascent community called the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which is intended to home and direct projects that are specifically endemic to the cloud native world in a way that's vendor neutral and is entirely open as well. And I think what we need to really start thinking about is how do we bring these two foundations closer together? They're serving effectively a very similar sort of customer demographic. They're operating in a slightly different way. Obviously, the OpenStack community is much more sort of established and robust and has a much broader base of support. But I'd love to find ways to actually create working groups that span the two foundations, look at cross-pollinating some of these technologies, and hopefully over time, tearing down the boundaries that exist between the foundations themselves and finding ways to sort of harmonize and bring them together in the fullness of time.
Yeah. So you did talk about how you're operating infrastructure at Google and how virtual machines are running within containers. But as you talk to enterprise users, what are you seeing in the enterprises? How are they adopting OpenStack and Kubernetes and the joint solution?
So I can provide my perspective. Most of our engagements start with what does it look like to run Kubernetes on OpenStack? Hey, we're an enterprise. We're all in on OpenStack. We've made a significant investment in this technology. We are looking to extend it to support these new workloads. And it always kind of starts there. The narrative that we started to see is the sort of the shifting view as people start to understand the different set of capabilities and values. There's a shifting kind of narrative around what if, but it's extremely early. The level of sort of general community thinking around what the utility of much deeper integration is pretty nascent. So for now, it's largely speculative. So I would love to get to a point where we have a couple of really strong reference implementations out there in production and are using it. And one of the things I'd love to kind of invite this community to participate in is we actually have a significant base of resources that have been gifted to us by Intel to run prototyping efforts. And if there are folks that are sort of speaking to this community that are looking and interested in creating sort of proof of concepts or working with the vendors in the cloud native community around proof of concepts, I'd love to put together some initiatives where we can use that asset that Intel's provided, put together a couple of plug fests, and really start kind of working through some of these things in a much more open and collaborative fashion.
Yeah.
Brandon?
Yeah, and on the why people are adopting or looking at this, the other thing that we're seeing is people want some of the management capabilities and monitoring capabilities of containers. Like, it takes a little bit of a mind stretch to think about isolating virtual machines instead of containers. But there's other things that, as we talk to customers about this, they want to see things like being able to pass through pieces of hardware to containers, this sort of thing. And so we're seeing some of the interest there, essentially being able to take some of these capabilities that they've relied on inside of OpenStack and pulling them into Kubernetes. So those are some of the other motivating factors that we're seeing today.
So, just to close, I'm going to spring a question on you.
Sure.
So one thing I hear all the time is that, Kubernetes is where OpenStack was 5 years ago, right? People are talking a lot about it, but in the adoption curve, it's really early. What's your thought around that? Is Kubernetes going to be adopted much more quicker than OpenStack? Does the joint solution make it more consumable?
I can provide perspective from sort of two lenses. One is I'm shocked to discover how many people are using the technology. It's one of these things that we at Google started working with the community to build, and it developed a life of its own. In a lot of large companies, I don't even know people using Kubernetes as an open source project. So about 40% of the time I encounter someone in an enterprise, they know someone in their organization who's actually experimenting with or using it. And we're seeing a tremendous amount of early production use. The adoption cycle is far quicker than any technology I've ever worked on. And this is really supported by some of the surveys, even the OpenStack surveys that point to Kubernetes as being the most widely used container orchestration technology out there. I can speak to our own hosted version, and I'm trying to be vendor neutral here. But when I look at technologies like Google Container Engine, which is a hosted version of Kubernetes, the growth of that is by far the strongest I've ever seen in a compute product. I built Google Compute Engine in the early days, and the adoption cycle of GKE is off the charts. Early this year, we were growing, well over 100% quarter over quarter, which is pretty good for a product. And since then, it's accelerated massively. The adoption rate is beyond anything I've ever seen. So I think the domain model's been demonstrated. There's a lot of appetite for this. People understand the need for these technologies, and they're looking at something that takes the experience that Docker's given in terms of that amazing first 5 hours of building and prototyping. And they want a robust platform that actually deals with the next 5 years of versioning and managing and updating and integrating and tying together these more complex systems. And so, I think it's the fastest growing product I've ever seen that I've ever personally worked on. We saw a lot of production use at times when it was crazy, like when people had no business running in production in the early days. And I would say about 40% of the enterprise I encounter have already adopted it in some way, shape, or form.
And I think for why we're seeing the adoption be so fast is the addressable market is a lot bigger for Kubernetes. The OpenStack, when it came out, we were really focused on that community was really focused on making a really great operations product, and I think it's succeeded very well. In fact, we're all in this room. But we're seeing a lot of demand for things like Kubernetes from the developers, from people who are packaging up and delivering software, ISVs. And so and the operators, we're seeing actually a lot of demand for that too. They like the abilities that Kubernetes gives them for monitoring and managing their applications over a time period. So it's just, the adoption, I think, is driven by, one, the success and the capabilities of the product, but two is the addressable market is larger than essentially where OpenStack was shooting initially. So.
Enough. So anything to close? I think we're keeping everybody from lunch. So,
Oh, thank you.
well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Brandon.